I call the Tuesday, January 22nd, 2019 work session meeting of the Portsmouth City Council to order. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Battle?
Here.
Mr. Clark?
Here.
Mr. Glover?
Here.
Mrs. Lucasberg?
Here.
Mr. Moody?
Here.
Ms. Simmons?
Here.
Mayor Rouse?
Here. Dr. Pack.
Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and members of City Council. Good evening. The U.S. Census Bureau has initiated community outreach to participate in the upcoming census of America's population. The goal, according to the Census Bureau, is to count everyone only once and in the right place. For the first time in 2020, new technology will allow response online, by phone, or by mail. As part of this effort, the city will need to work as a partner to ensure the residents of Portsmouth provide vital population data. There are three primary areas for the city to participate, including the creation of a complete count committee, raise awareness through the use of city communications and social media outreach, and finally, help recruit census workers. This evening, we have Mr. Craig Krigsvold, Partnership Specialist from the Census Bureau, to speak with us in more depth about this very important 2020 census count. The Portsmouth Economic Development Authority plans to finance the acquisition of property in the Victory Crossing area. This financing is proposed to include a cooperation agreement between the Economic Development Authority and the city. Mr. David P. Rose, Senior Vice President and Manager of Public Finance with Davenport and Company, will deliver a presentation that describes the process, summarizes the proposals received from the financial institutions, and recommends the option Davenport and the EDA believes is the best option. Mr. Rose's presentation will also include information on the rating agencies and rate the city's bonds and Portsmouth debt ratio, as requested by City Council at the January 8th Public Works session. Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council, at our January 8th meeting, you asked Sheriff Moore to be present this evening, and you're requesting him to speak with you in regards to the Hampton Roads Regional Jail, City of Portsmouth bed vacancies. The 2019 legislative session is in an odd year, so it is only a 45-day session. Although this is a short session, it is filled with meaningful issues and bills. Mr. Solomon Ashby and myself will provide key highlights of relevant bills. Mr. Krigsvold.
Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Kevin Krigsvold. I'm Partnership Specialist for the United States Census Bureau. And so what I want to do today is just talk to you. You probably know a lot about the census already, but I want to give you kind of a Cliff Notes version of why we do the census, talk about some job opportunities that we're going to have available to you, to Portsmouth, talk about low response score areas around here, and then talk about forming a complete count committee. And that's my big ask here today, is to get you guys to form a complete count committee. So again, the census happens every 10 years, as most of you know. It's mandated by the Constitution. We have to count everybody in the country every 10 years. Several reasons why we do that. Number one, apportionment of seats in Congress. It's a big one. But maybe what's more important for here in Portsmouth is the distribution of federal dollars. So every year, $675 billion gets distributed to communities around the country based on census numbers. So if you have an undercount, you're going to lose access to quite a bit of money. I can't give you an exact number on what that would be, because it's a sliding scale. Every community is a little bit different. But Baltimore did a study, for example. They found that for every person that does not fill out their census form, they lose about $1,800 a year. Over a 10-year period, that's $18,000. Norfolk did a study, $2,000 per person, $20,000 over a 10-year period, because you can't change the census numbers except for every 10 years, right? So that's a 10-year effect. A lot of tribal communities who rely desperately on federal funds, $3,000 per person, $30,000. So I'm not sure what the number will be here, but I think it's fair to say Norfolk, Baltimore might be about this similar type of thing. There are a lot of businesses look at census numbers as well to determine if they want to come to a community. So that's another. Henrico just had a Walmart built recently based on their census numbers. So it's very important that every single person in this community is counted, and that's what we're going to need help from you doing. Here's an example of 50 different ways that the census data is used. So again, it's for things like building roads and hospitals, school lunch programs, disaster relief. We all know in this community we're one storm away from having a lot of trouble. So census data is used in a lot of different ways, and the money is tied to a lot of these things. So it's important that, again, that we count everybody. I'll talk to you a little bit about the differences between this census and what we've done in the past. In the past, some of you may remember, it was something would come to a piece of mail would come to your house, you'd fill it out, send it back. We're trying to mitigate costs as much as possible. It's a very constrained, fiscally constrained time right now, so we're trying to bring down the costs for doing the census as much as possible. So what we're doing this year that's different, first and foremost, we're asking people to fill things out online. So a piece of mail will come to their home. There will be a URL on there, and they will asking people to fill it out via the URL. A lot of people don't have access to the internet, so there's also a QR code that will be on there. 92% of the people in the country have cell phones, so they could use a cell phone as a way of getting their information back. There's also a telephone number that in the past we didn't have. If somebody is completely technology phobic, they want to call, they can call on this number and someone on the other end will fill out the form for them. There's also a mail-in option, again, but we're starting to get expensive now. And then the last one is the enumerators, having people actually going and knocking on doors. So we want to prevent that as much, we're going to mitigate that as much as possible. The census numbers, we will have a count, irrespective of how this happens. That they have to be on the President's desk by December 31st, 2020. So that's the date. April 1st, 2020 is the actual census date. So we want to make sure that everybody fills out their form as quickly as April 1st as possible. And what we found in the past is about 73% of people fill out their form within the first week or two. But then those people who don't fill out their form in a quick fashion, those are in the low response score, we call it, area. Anything in that 23, 24% and higher, those are areas that we need to target to make sure that they will fill out their form quickly. We have come up with something called the Response Outreach Area Mapper as a guide to our communities. So typed in Portsmouth here, you can see any of the darker areas here, dark blue. Those areas are generally areas that are areas where people don't fill out their forms quickly. The lighter colored areas are the areas that people fill out their forms more quickly.
Well, before you leave that map, can
Yes, sir.
somebody orient us? Can somebody put a landmark?
Can you, Mr.
Where's, I assume it's oriented north.
So Norfolk's
Give it a
right.
shot. Norfolk's, Portsmouth is here.
Well, that helps.
Kind of an interstate landmark.
So it's a
You can-
bigger,
Like the
bigger
shipyard.
map than just
Looks like the
Portsmouth.
shipyard.
Yeah, it's the entire
More of a
country.
regional map.
Yeah, it's the entire country. And this, you can go to this map. It's
Region.
census.gov ROAM, ROAM, and type in every census tract that we have available. I pulled out a couple here for you. Census tract 2118 here in Portsmouth. You can see there 31.5% of people did not fill out their form quickly. So that's,
Say that again.
31.5%. You can see here in this number. The low response score here, 31.5% of people did not fill out their form quickly.
In that particular census
And
tract.
that census tract. So that is problematic, as you can imagine. If we're going down the road and it's getting closer to December and people are still not filling out their form, you could lose out on a lot of the federal dollars that will be available to you.
Hold on a second.
Yeah.
Anybody know what area of the city that is? Census tract, this is an eye test.
It says 2118, 2118.
Dr. Pat,
It says Portsmouth City.
Medium household income of $17,099, so it's,
I just clicked on the dark blue regions. I didn't really check to see which exactly.
That's Census Tract 2118.
Yes. Because we're a statistical organization, we have quite a bit of information available on this ROAM map. So things like median household income, ethnicity, we talk about age, talk about whether you rent versus you own, your home, English as a first language. So those are all things that are there because we need help
Census tract, census tract 20.
getting into those communities and saying, these are we know that we can reach these areas. We know we need specific types of people to get into this area and talk to these people.
Yeah.
Maybe there are people who are in Portsmouth who understand this area better than we do, who can get in there and have those people feel comfortable filling out their form. Trusted voices getting in there and saying, you need to fill out your census form. Don't let this pass by. I pulled up another one. This one's even a little bit worse. 36.1% people did not fill out their form quickly. Census Tract 2105. That's a total population of 2,177 people. Median household income of 20,500. Again,
Yes.
we're going to need help getting into those communities and making sure that they fill out their form.
The first one is Swanson Homes, West Bear area, the 2118.
Everybody hear that? On council?
Okay. Why don't people fill out their form? There's a lot of different reasons, myriad reasons why they don't do it. One of the things that we found is that people are afraid of federal government, that we're going to provide information to any agency, FBI, police, ICE, housing authority, whatever. We are bound by law. Everybody who works for the Census Bureau is bound by law. We could go to jail for 5 years if we provide any information to about anybody. We have a fine of $250,000. So we need help socializing this idea that if we need you to fill out your form, and it doesn't matter if you're doing something wrong or whatever, we're not going to report you to anybody at all. We need to count everybody because they're using Portsmouth's resources. Whether or not they're doing something wrong or not, they're here using your roadways, your hospitals, whatever. So we need to make sure that they understand that they're helping the city where they live by filling out the form. Just more of the confidentiality. Again, 5 years, $250,000 fine. If anybody in the Census Bureau says anything, and that's not just for this census, that's for life. So we can't say anything to anybody. Again, our big ask of you is to help us make sure that all that money is coming back into this community. So what we're asking you to do is form what's called a complete count committee, and that's a body that you would determine how you want that to look. Here's an example. Here's some of the reasons why: increase response rate, utilize local knowledge and expertise to influence people to fill out their census form, bring together a cross-section of community members who focus on 2020 awareness. This is a sample complete count committee. Again, this is your baby. You decide how you want it to look, who you want on this. This is what a lot of places do. They have something similar to this. The mayor or a designee, someone in the public school system, council members, deputy director, faith-based leaders, just any trusted voice in the community that can help get the message out that the census is coming and that everybody needs to fill out the form. There are subcommittees that you could also form that you can get more granular. This is up to you. We're not telling you have to do this. You can do anything you want, but I'm here and the Census Bureau is here as a resource. We'll provide training, we'll provide best practices, we'll do things like that for you. But you will decide how you want the complete count committee to go. Again, outreach and promotion, making sure that the socialized idea that the census is coming and that everybody in each community needs to fill out the form. I keep hitting on that, but again, $1,800 per person, $2,000 per person over 10 years is a lot of money that might go missing in this community. Basic idea of the timeline, where we are now, we're in the recruiting in early stages all the way through the fall of 2019. Again, 2020, April 1st, 2020 is the actual date, but we are going to be filling a lot of jobs. Every 10 years, this is the largest amount of people that, other than wartime, that we have people mobilization in the country. So in our Philadelphia region, which is an 8-state region, we're looking to hire more than 500,000 people, part-time and full-time jobs. Throughout the entire country, that's about 3 million people will be hired by the Census Bureau. So we have a lot of jobs available, and we need to fill those jobs. So we're looking for help from communities like this, if you have a job board, if you have any way that you can help get our information out that we have jobs available, we would appreciate it. There are area census offices. There will be one in Virginia Beach. So people from this area can go to those offices, can go to that office. But the interesting thing about most of these jobs is that they're work from home and that they are make your own hours. So it's great for college students, for retirees, for veterans, for whoever just needs a little bit of extra money.
Can you explain the Wave 1 and Wave 2? Is there any significant?
Sure. Wave 1 is just, that's going to be like our test bed in Fairfax. Wave 2 will be a little bit later down the road. It's just, we're not going to need a big presence until around the October timeline for that office. That office kind of represents the Philadelphia region down here. Some of the jobs that will be available, these jobs are anywhere from $12 an hour up to more than $40 an hour. Again, some full-time, some part-time jobs. Don't know exactly how many people in this region, in this area, will be looking for, but it's fair to say in the Tidewater region, we'll be looking for thousands of people. So we need help filling those jobs. Again, some of the pay scale, up to $43, starting around $12 for the lowest paid jobs. And that said, we have, you can go to the census.gov. There's quite a bit of information there. We have a library with resources. I am your representative, your liaison for this area, so I'm here to help you in any way that I can. I can bring the full force of the Census Bureau here to help training and help provide as much information as I can for you. And one last slide is just different ways that you can reach out to the Census Bureau. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, first, thank you for coming. This is very important to the whole country, but
Yep.
important to us. Our discussion, I recommend that we ask the city manager to develop the structure of what would be a suitable complete count committee for city council. And we need to do this early enough because their work is going to have to be done in 2018, and they can't peak too early. But we got to appoint them, got to get them places to work from, give them a mission, probably do some training. So the earlier that we get this, the better.
If I may, I was in Richmond today with the state has a complete count committee. I was there helping them train them today. That's their second meeting. Norfolk has one, Richmond has one. There are some communities that have already started. There are many that are not even as far along as you guys are. But
Can you come back with something no later than the second meeting in February, if not the first?
Should be able to come back with something. We've been working and discussing, so we should be able to come back with the 11th meeting of February with some strategy.
And the Complete Count Committee is something that's been around for a good long period of time. The city of Suffolk did a special census in 1976.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and created a Complete Count Committee. And part of that process, too, if you could have your staff analyze those areas that seem to be unresponsive,
right,
so that we can give that focus. We can get some feel for what that map that...
Right, the 2105 is Port Norfolk along Mount Vernon and Detroit Avenue.
Okay.
Now, I'm just calculating 30% of 2,000
So we didn't count many people.
times $2,000.
Yeah, a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
if I should clarify that, so that's like the first stages. We go through. We have actually people knocking on doors for the entire time. So the number gets up to about 92 to 93% nationally, but
Nationally, but what is ours?
still right.
Mayor, can I ask a question? Could you, the mayor asked a question about the first wave, and in the first wave you had Fairfax.
Yes, ma'am.
Fairfax, and then later you had the other. What did you say? What's the
So
difference?
we have a regional office in Philadelphia. That's our
Right.
our hub.
Right.
What we're doing is we're putting smaller regional offices around our region. So the first one is going to be in Fairfax,
Okay.
and that's Wave 1, and that's really because it's close to the Beltway, and there's going to be a lot of action up there. So around the October timeframe, we're going to be having area census offices all around this region, and so Virginia Beach is in wave 2 in like October. So that's going to be an office with about 40 to 50 people in it. That will be the hub for this area. But then there will be hundreds, if not thousands, of people that will be working from home, reporting to people within that office as well. So again, the benefit is working from home and making your own hours for a lot of the hourly workers. But that 40 to 50 people in Virginia Beach will be working full time from that office.
Where is your office?
Our headquarters is in.
Where is yours?
I personally live in Norfolk,
Okay.
so I'm a work from home as well. I have a desk in my home and travel all over the
So
state.
you're nearby. If we need you,
I am.
we can reach out to you.
Right.
Easy.
I'm here for you, so my job is to make it easy for you.
Well, let's establish as our goal to have 100%.
We've got to.
And ask you
Yeah.
to get a good, complete count and a strategy. We need to start at April 1, 2020 and plan backwards.
Right, we
Have
need
some
to.
milestones.
We need to start now, Mayor. We also want to make sure our people have an opportunity to be employed.
Yes.
And there will be thousands of jobs, and we want to have Portsmouth citizens to be a part of this count.
There are jobs right now. There are many jobs available right now.
Right, and
You've
we've just got to get on it.
It's if you go to 2020 census.gov/jobs. So these jobs I was talking about, like the enumerators, there are people working right now who are making the hourly wage, but we're asking them to go to an address and say, do people still live in this address, for example? So they have like jobs, like 6 to 8 week jobs, and then they transition to the next job, to the next job, to the next job. So we have many, many jobs available at this moment right now.
Because this will take place during our next budget, 2019-2020, do we have a consensus to ask the city manager to put the funding that this committee can use if we have to take out ads, if we have to get special mailings, if you would come up with a proposal in your budget proposal for 2020. Do we have agreement on that, everyone?
Yes.
Yes. I need to have a complete count committee if
I
they,
think we should have information from when we did this in 2010.
yeah,
Say that
We
again,
will
you
have
said-
information. I'm terribly sorry.
I didn't hear what you said.
internally,
I said
what we
we
did on
should have
2010.
information from what we did in 2010.
Yeah, we definitely
The-
could.
yeah, the
We need
final
to
one.
pull and look
Yeah.
from
And
I
then
mean,
we have the
How
structure.
did we do it?
Have the structure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Just as an FYI, the Census Bureau is hiring a firm to try to help us with messaging, and a lot of that is going to be generic enough that you can
Every city can
you can use it for every
Right.
city.
But we still have to pay
You
for
know,
our
We may have
advertising.
to take the ad out and pay for it.
Oh, we
if
will.
want to do so.
Yes.
No need to have a committee if they don't have the resources to get the job.
We've just got to make sure everybody's counted.
Everybody on board?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And just as an aside, I just want to say I was at the General Assembly on Friday, and you did an excellent job. By the way, I thought,
Well, bless your heart.
yeah,
Thank
you were very convincing and compelling.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Sure.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Mr.
Rich.
Cooper.
Tell all the delegates.
Okay, now we'll have Mr. David Rose from Davenport LLC to come forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Patton. I have a handout here as well as on the...
Which one is
So
first?
we're going to
That
do the
one's first?
EDA. That one first.
I'll give those out. Mr.
Okay, you sure? All right.
I got you.
Somebody.
That's right.
Think I can handle that?
Good. Sounds
That one
great.
right there.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. I'll just wait a moment if I could and make sure everyone gets a copy of this.
All right.
You could go on, you could go
Oh,
on.
go ahead? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Appreciate, again, David Rose. Pleasure to be here. Members of council, Mr. Mayor. I will not be very long because, yes, sir.
Because we have two new members of council, can you tell the new members about your firm
Okay.
briefly and what you do for the city.
I'd be delighted. So I have the good fortune of working for Davenport and Company. We're headquartered in Richmond. We have offices across the river for the moment in Norfolk, and we are about 155 years young. Our firm works as an independent financial advisor to cities and counties throughout the Mid-Atlantic Southeast. We have about 500 different local governments that we work with, although we do it in about 15 states. And as you can tell by the lack of hair, I've been doing this for a while. This is now my 38th year in doing that. I'm from Richmond, Virginia, and that's where I live, and enjoy working with you. And we've gone back and started working with the city probably, I would say, about 10 to 12 years ago, so if that's correct. And I think that's a good segue, if I could, Mr. Mayor, if that's and again, we're about 450 employees. We're privately owned, and as Dr. Patton said, I have the good fortune of managing a practice of about 30 of us that do this, and I've just got a great staff, many of whom have been with me for decades, including Kyle Laux, who some of you have met. He looks like he's 20, but Kyle's almost 40, and he's been with me now 16 years, so we're very appreciative of having him. So with that said, what I'd like to do today is just to give you the results of the request for a proposal. That was a competitive process that we did. Again, as Dr. Patton indicated, you all know, we worked closely with staff, worked with the EDA, and the goal here was to get the most cost-effective and flexible funding for about $5.275 million to allow the city to do the things that you're intending to do over at Victory Crossing. I think it's a good segue, and when the mayor asked me to give a little background, a dozen years ago, maybe a little less than that, maybe 11 or so years ago, we went and looked to try to get some bids, if you would, from banking institutions, both near and far. We found a grand total of one banking institution that was willing to provide funds to the city. Today, we've had a plethora. In fact, in going through this selection process, we had 8 different responses that were bona fide and met all the criteria. So that is a far cry from where you've been. Your credit ratings, which I think in a moment I'll get on that as a second topic, reflects that as well. So we want to do nothing if we can to change all that, which is an upward trajectory. That said, very quickly, we asked the banks for fixed rates at 3, 4, and 5 years. We asked them to be both taxable and tax exempt. But ultimately, working with bond counsel, which is McGuire Woods, we recommended that it would be most flexible to be it on a taxable basis. Again, that's all anticipating what could happen with regard to the property over the years. And then finally, we told them that the security behind this financing would be twofold. One would be any funds provided by the EDA first, and then secondly, a backstop of the city itself under that cooperative agreement that Dr. Patton alluded to just a few moments ago. So with that said, I will cut to the chase and say that when all is said and done, we don't have a lot of explaining to do. We ended up getting a fixed rate for both 3, 4, and 5 years by Union Bank, which is basically out of the Central Virginia area, Caroline County, the Richmond area combination. Union Bank was most competitive, but also met all the criteria, which basically allows us to prepay this early without penalty a couple of times a year, and so the flexibility is there. So should we want to pay this off in 3 years, for example, for whatever reason, we're able to do that. And again, that interest rate is locked in at 3.21%. That was considerably lower than the estimates that we had when I was here a few months ago prior to the last meeting.
And the reason why you're going taxable as opposed to tax exempt explain that again?
Yes, sir. The reason for that is that the disposition of the property itself, this will not require us then, if we sell it in part, with regard to the overall property, to be deemed taxable by the IRS. So this is really a protection for the city up front, so that we can in effect do anything we want with regard to the properties. It doesn't just have to go to a not-for-profit, for example, and that's the reason for that. So working with McGuire Woods, who again is our longtime financial bond counsel, as we call it, a specialty for local governments, that's ultimately their call, and we concluded that, again, it's most flexible. All right. And you can see, by the way, I should have pointed out, we had banks as far as Utah and Arizona that bid, and banks as close to right here in our community that were, again, looking to provide funding to the city. So with that being said, again, I think this is really just a summary of the critical points. We were really delighted, though, that the rate was not only low, but it was the same rate for 3, 4, or 5 years. So we will tell them with your blessing, tonight will be a public hearing, if you should approve this, that we're going to say go out to 5 years. It's the same as 3, but it gives us that flexibility. And when I say us, we're talking about the city when I say flexibility. So there, again, one of the things that I would point out is within 30 days, it can be prepaid. It can be done on up to 2 times a year, which is what we call the payment dates. So that allows us, again, tremendous flexibility. And then also, your credit has been pre-approved. What I mean by that is there will not be a further process by Union Bank. They have looked at the city closely. We've been working with them, and they are good to go as long as we close this by the end of the month. And that brings us to our schedule here. It's my last page. Some of the critical things, the EDA board met on the 15th. Union Bank had their credit approval that I was just talking about on the 17th. And here we are tonight on the 22nd, asking you to hold that required public hearing. Just for those of you who may not be as aware, anytime a local government borrows money, you need to have a public hearing so the citizens can chime in. And assuming that goes well and that you will approve this after that public hearing, we would then notify Union Bank tomorrow and move towards closing before the end of the month. In this case, the 31st is what's slated. So with that, Mr. Mayor, members of council, Dr. Pettis, anyone has any questions? I don't know if Ms. Spivey wants to add anything, but...
Dr. Pat?
No, we have no questions on the outside. I'd like for council to know that this presentation has been made to the EDA. It was made at their meeting last week, and they were able to answer all the questions, and the EDA is very much aware that we moved it to council's approval.
It was unanimously approved there.
Yes.
Any questions?
Nope.
Okay.
With that, Mr. Mayor, I have our second presentation. I don't know, Debbie, is this require that? All right. And while that booklet is being handed out, what I'm going to do over the next few minutes is talk a little bit about the importance of the city's credit rating, a little bit about debt overview, and again, if we didn't have the support of your staff, couldn't be here tonight doing this. But again, the timing, I think, is excellent, because those 8 bids, as I said earlier, is basically 8-fold from where we were about a decade ago. And you'll see why in a few moments, because the city enjoys excellent credit ratings. They're all viewed as being stable. They're in what we call the second highest category, a step below AAA, which is the highest a local government can get. And frankly, the way the city's particularly the first cities and the mature cities in Virginia, are set up with regard to the local governmental structure. There are very few, if you would, urban mature cities that are AAA. We tend to see some more, such as something like a Suffolk or a Chesapeake, Virginia Beaches, that at one time were a combination of counties that became cities. So that had, again, a lot of room to grow. But the more urban cities, Richmonds, Norfolk, Lynchburgs, if they're highly rated, which several of them are, like yourself, they're going to be in the category you'll see in a moment. So with that, let me just see if I could just provide a little perspective. When we talk about credit ratings, what we mean is that there are effectively 3 national independent credit rating agencies. They are companies that have no tie whatsoever to a particular local government. They are truly disinterested from that perspective, and they are all basically located in the city of New York, but have some tentacles in other places. That's Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch, some of which have been around for 100 years. And again, ratings are critical. Those of you may recall about a decade, 12 years ago, when the economy really had its national problems, a lot of the rating agencies really took it on the chin as it related to housing-related bonds and some of those collateralized mortgage obligations. That really was in what we call the corporate area. But for the municipal area, the world that we spend our days in, that you're in here as your official council member status, the rating agencies are right on point when it came to local governments. And as a result, they are viewed as important today as ever before, that they are the liaisons, if you would, to the investors, to banking institutions that potentially, like this just moments ago, will lend us the credit to do the things that we want to do. So the ratings are a proxy for a well-run local government from a financial perspective and economic health, and they send a critical signal, we believe, to the overall marketplace that if you're trying to do economic development and you're highly rated, that means that you're a pretty good bet that a local or some non-local business can invest in the city of Portsmouth knowing that you've got your house in order. So that's our perspective. So what are your ratings? I'll show you this right now. This is your actual ratings. We didn't make a mistake as it related to a small a or a large A. Different agencies show it a little differently, and you'll see that in a moment. But you're all right in the heart of the AA category, which is considered, not my words, but theirs, very strong. And you can notice here, the last time we had that formal review was December of 17, not 18, just a month or two ago, but back in 17 we did a refinancing. So we are coming on the time to get our ratings refreshed, and we're going to see that happening in this calendar year that we're in, perhaps even depending in the end of this fiscal year, but that remains to be seen in working with staff. So as I mentioned earlier, that tier of very strong is not our words, that is the rating agencies. And you can see we're in the very middle of that category. Moody's does a large capital A and then smaller A's. S&P and Fitch do all capital A's. That's just the way they do that. And so I will tell you, all of these categories from here on up is considered investment grade, and then you hear the term junk bonds or non-investment grade. That's anything from tiers 5 to 10. And so again, you being in that second tier, you get a sense of order of magnitude when you realize there are 10 tiers to credit ratings. So we wanted to give you the history. You have come from, in all 3 agencies, being at one time a negative outlook and even lower rated to this higher rating that you're in now. So this rating that you enjoy today is as high as, if not higher, than any of the ratings you've had going all the way back to 1971. So as far back as the ratings occurred, that's where you were. You'll notice Fitch starts in about 97 because that's when they came into the business of working with local governments. They've been around for many years, years, but that's when they started doing local governments. So what drives a credit rating? There are basically 4 major factors: economy, finances, debt, and management. And we're going to give you in a few moments some of the pieces of those. But suffice it to say, interestingly enough, the debt levels are actually the lowest or equal to the lowest of overall ratings. So it's not just about your debt, but really the 2 biggest pieces on, if you look at it, are 1 and 2 combined, which is the overall economy, as well as, and that, by the way, is not just the city, that's the regional economy. They look to, in this case, Hampton Roads, then they look to Virginia, then they look to, Virginia into northeast North Carolina. They want to see how all that looks. But the second thing that you really have the most control of, and I'm going to make some points about that in a moment, is your finances and your fund balances. And in that regard, the city has done an excellent job, and you're going to see some of those comments that they make going back several years. So ultimately, that is even in some cases 2 or 3 times greater than even the debt levels. We want to be cognizant of the debt, but again, to the extent that you continue to manage in a structurally balanced way and you keep your fund balances up, which you've got policies for, and you exceed those policies in a good way, that's going to be critical to continuing to keep that rating. And then ultimately the management means all of you, not just the city manager and her staff, but the city council. That's what they consider management, and they are very positive about the way you've managed. And for example, just having me tonight in just a session is the kind of thing that they look positively on, that here we are collectively trying to educate each other on what it means to have a good credit rating. So I won't be much longer, I promise. But here are the drivers in those 4 areas. I like to call them the 4 food groups, if you would. The economy, it's really the one you have the least control over because it's regional. It's sort of like moving around one of the big ships. It takes a while to move that around. But the number 2, the finances and fund balance, you can do more harm in one session than you can turning around the economy over a couple 5 years. So that's really critical. And again, you've done a very, very good job in that area. In terms of debt, the city, that's probably one of our weaker areas in relative to terms because, again, we have a good number of debt outstanding, and it's been that way for many years. But again, as long as it's managed within the overall perspective, a structurally balanced budget, which it's been, that debt is going to be fine. And then finally, overall management, for example, you have adhered to your policies, you've done some long-range planning, you've done some things that were necessary, such as shoring up all of your pensions, and so that's what they mean by good management, and the city again gets very good ratings on that score. So I'm just going to go quickly. I'm not going to read this, but I'll just highlight a point or two. This was what Moody's, in their overall public report, this is exactly what they said. What could lead to an upgrade is to continue to make sure that your funding for your pensions are adequate, continue to make sure the balanced budget is there, increase substantial tax base. That's not easy. You, of course, have the distinction of having the largest percentage, if you would, of a city with non-taxable base, and yet what you do with the taxable base they like and they're very comfortable with. What could lead to a downgrade? Really the opposite, particularly 1 and 2, if indeed we don't continue to provide the funding as necessary for the pensions and we don't keep those reserve levels where they've been above your policy, that can lead quickly to a downgrade. S&P, they describe it a little differently, but I think it's important that we highlight where an S&P is coming from. They say, their words, very strong management. So they see your budget performance is strong, very strong liquidity. What that means is, again, those reserve levels I was talking about. And again, where is the outlook? Why do they have a stable outlook? And you can read there that they believe you're going to continue to do the things you've been doing. So again, when the 2020 budget comes around in the next few weeks and months, they believe, and why they have a stable outlook, you're going to do those things that you've been doing, and hopefully that will continue to be the case. Then lastly, with Fitch, they see, again, you have, from their perspective, good solid reserve cushions. In their particular instance, they don't see your debt levels as being as high, but again, they say moderate fixed cost, and then they actually go into something that the other rating agencies do not do. They actually assign sort of mini ratings, if you would, within the greater rating of AA. And I think it's important to point out that, for example, their long-term liability, that's sort of the debt levels, they give you an A. So you're a little below. But if you look at the very last, your operating performance, that is that budget, that's staying within the lines, if you would, what you do, they actually they give you a AAA. So again, each of those balance out. The other twos are AA, and that's why they come to an overall score of stable and AA. So finally, just a couple more pages here. You've got several policies. All of those policies are subject to being reviewed. We review them every couple of years. We talk about them every year. I think for tonight's purposes, I won't belabor them, if that's all right, Mr. Mayor. I could always elaborate, but if I could just quickly say we've got several
Quickly go through them, if you would, please.
I'm sorry, Mayor.
Quickly go through.
Okay, very quickly then. Tax-supported debt as a percentage of revenues under 10%. It's a nice way of saying how much debt is on your credit card. If you think about it, if you've got $1 of revenues, no more than 10 cents is tied to your debt as it relates to capital, and we'll get to that in a moment. So you keep within that realm. The second is just your overall debt versus the market value, meaning of the overall value of the city's, if you want to call it real estate, that's basically going to stay under 4%, and you'll see that in a moment. You meet that. And then lastly, how quickly, a 10-year payout ratio, do you pay your debts? What that means, for those of you perhaps that have a mortgage, think of it this way. If you have a mortgage, let's say, that's $100,000, and you have a typical 30-year mortgage, the average homeowner will pay off about 25% of that in 10 years. So of $100,000, basically $25,000 would be paid off in 10 years, and then the full amount would be paid off in 30 years. You are paying over 50% of that in 10 years. It's one of the reasons why you pay your debts quickly. It allows us to bring on additional debt for other capital needs. And in fact, you're above 50%. We'll show you that as well. And then lastly, you have a legal debt limit that's set by the Commonwealth, and that basically says that irrespective of whether it's tax supported or not, it can't be more than 10% of that assessed value, and you basically cut yours at 4%. So you're doing that, you're well under that, and that's again what you'd expect to see from a highly rated local government. Now, this is the policy. You'll notice here the dark blue is your existing debt service of your capital that I alluded to. That's the way the rating agencies look at your meeting the policy. But then we add on top of that your pension obligation bonds, which really are an operational debt piece. But again, you'll notice that does have us go above that 10%. What that really tells us is that we want to be careful and cautionary when it comes to doing new debt. And we want to make sure that the trajectory of this is all going to stay somewhat level over time. And so again, when we talk about your upcoming capital needs, your existing CIP, we're going to make sure that we keep it as close to the 10% as possible with regard to the dark blue, and again, making sure that the money is there, and it has been for years, to take care of that sort of that light color, if you would, which is the money from the pension bonds, which comes from your operations. Your 4% that I alluded to, once again, you can see how quickly that goes down. The reason that goes down so quickly is because, again, you pay your debts off very quickly. So again, that'll continue to be layered on with the new needs, but again, we want to make sure that we're cognizant of both the existing debt as well as the pension bonds and where it is. And then lastly, I talked about that payout ratio. There's your policy above 50%. Right now, you're close to 70%. So you're really in a very strong position to take on additional debt because, again, it's things you need to do to sustain the city. But again, you're putting yourself in a position. We tend to set our debts up around the 20, 25-year mark as opposed to longer. So with that, that's our disclaimer that says basically, if you can read it, that we are simply your advisor. We're not looking to add debt for the sake of adding debt, but because you need it and when you need it. So that's it, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Happy to answer any questions. Dr. Batten?
Any questions?
Always helpful.
And you have your books.
Dr. Pat?
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Rhodes.
Thank you.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council, we're going to, as I indicated, just give you an update on the 2019 General Assembly that is now in session. And I will start with showing you, and you have your document in the box. This is a short session, 45 days. You have a calendar that will be coming up where the session started January the 9th. We are at the 22nd, which is today. On Thursday, we'll have the Virginia Municipal League Legislative Day, of which the city clerk will go over with you the schedule for that day shortly. Okay, these are the key dates, with the 24th being of Virginia Municipal League Day. You can look through from the month of February all the way through April the 3rd. That is where the General Assembly is looking to reconvene. The scheduled adjournment is of February 23rd, but there's a lot that's going to go on between now and that date. When you look at the, hold on, let me go back. I thought, I will talk just briefly on the bill tracking activities. For the 2019 General Assembly stats, there have been 2,245 bills introduced. 101 have passed the House of Delegates. 85 have passed the Senate. 39 have passed both houses. 296 have failed. 2,114 are still pending, including numerous House and Senate bill amendments. Portsmouth legislative tracking activities, 384 bills have been posted in our track bill system to date. 65 have received position statement. 319 have not, and we have about a 5.9 response rate. Today we sent back out to all of our partners within municipal government, including our school partners, to respond to bills as they are coming forth to them, letting us know that they have read it, calling to our attention if there's anything they would like for our legislative team to address for them. We are having representatives for bills in Richmond every day. Today we had with the SNAP bill, we had both Ms. Little Hill and our coordinator of SNAP for the city in Richmond. She'll be back on Thursday because that will be another bill that you all will sit in on that will be reconvening. With that, Mr. Ashby will come forward and talk about some specific bills.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council, yesterday was a very significant day as it relates to the bill sponsored by our own Senator Louise Lucas. As I have indicated to some of you, we had a great success in that the Senator's Bill 1126 was approved in a 9-3 vote and sent forward to the Senate Finance Committee. This is the bill that concerns casino gambling in the Commonwealth of Virginia. A couple of things, just to make a couple of points with regard to that legislation. Part of the success of that was the fact that we were able to have a number of other jurisdictions essentially have their bill grafted into Senator Lucas's bill. The Bristol, Virginia bill was grafted into the senator's bill. Also, a bill that was coming out of Virginia was also grafted into her bill. And so with that, we now have a bill as it sits today, with the potential of having some 4 or 5 potential locations for a casino within the Commonwealth of Virginia. There are a number of different criteria in order for a casino to be located in those areas. One of those, of course, is a local referendum, and you all will be hearing a little bit more about that. Again, I think the mayor's used the analogy before. We're starting on the front end. If it comes out the way it goes in, we'll have some work to do at the end of the session in the end of February. Let me just mention a couple more points. During the pendency of that bill, the expectation is, and the bill sets forth, that a license will not be issued until July of 2020. In that interim period of time, there will be regulations that will also be crafted and developed, and there will also be opportunities for the Senate Finance Committees to do research on various other communities and the tax structure and the regulatory schemes set forth in other localities that have gaming. Any questions about that particular matter before we go to some of the other matters that are pending?
Let me just make this comment. Senator Lucas has been putting this bill in for 25 years, and this is the first time a bill like this has been reported out of committee, so this is a big deal. Again, the vote yesterday, as Solomon said, was 9-3 with 1 abstention. Bill, the staff from Virginia Beach abstained. It does allow for casinos in Portsmouth, Danville, Bristol, Norfolk, and Richmond, with a key factor in every one of them that a referendum has to be held and pass. Even though, and I think Solomon has given you a copy of the bill, it has enactment clauses, as Solomon said. A study is to be done and brought back no later than November 1, and the purpose for that, so that the results of the study can be considered by the 2020 General Assembly. It tasked the Lottery Board to come up with, to promulgate regulations relating to gaming other than what's set forth in the bill. And then lastly, that no license can be issued until 2020, July 1. In doing that, think of parallel tracks. It allows those 5 localities to go ahead and start doing the things necessary. We don't have to wait until the 2020 General Assembly session to take place and be concluded. So this is a good place for us, and it represents a lot of work that took place from Friday, when the committee heard 3 bills, to Monday, when we have Senator Lucas's bill coming out.
Let me, thank you, Mayor. With that, let me cover a couple of additional bills in the city's legislative package and let you know where they are. We have SJ 265, the discussion as it relates to reducing recycling rates. That matter is currently in the House Committee on Rules. That committee does not have a regular meeting date, and so we are awaiting notice from Ms. Sherry Neal as to when that matter is going to come up. When it does come up, we will be sending folks to speak to that particular bill. As it relates to the felony drug conviction and TANF eligibility legislation that was submitted, again, we expect that to be heard next week, and those matters are still pending in the Senate Committee on Rehabilitation and Social Services. as Dr. Patton mentioned to you, Ms. Little Hill did go to speak to HB 1891 also. With regard to the city's initiative on providing voting rights information to those who are detained in city jails but have not been adjudicated, again, that matter is will be heard next Tuesday, along with Senate Bill 1202 and HB 1800. Once we get the confirmation that those bills will be heard, Ms. Neal will be reaching out to various representatives to come and speak to that bill. The Freedom of Information Act study on threat of and the expense of fishing expeditions, that bill has been referred to the Committee on Rules. Again, that does not have a scheduled date, but as soon as that matter is scheduled, we will be having individuals come forward. And last, Delegate Heretic has sponsored HJ 629, a discussion on how to, a study on how to deal with tolls and reduce that contract entered into by the state. That is also in the Rules Committee, and we'll be awaiting the actual scheduling of that legislation. And once it is scheduled, we will be reaching out to have individuals go up to speak to that matter. Any questions?
Yes.
Mayor, based on what happened at the TPO last week, would the TPO maybe have something to say about buying down the ERC?
It will. And I was going to cover that at the liaison report. At the TPO, on a motion made by me, was unanimously adopted that we create a task force that is comprised of mayors on the south side and on the peninsula, plus Shep Miller, who's on the Commonwealth Transportation Board, and Kathy Vick from the Port Authority, to study how to do away with the ERC contract. So that's the goal. This will have less of an impact in this session, but more of an impact in the next session.
But at least we're
For the first time, I might say, there's unanimous recognition and acknowledgement by a recorded vote that this is not a Portsmouth problem, that this is a regional problem, that this is not just a Portsmouth or even Portsmouth-Norfolk problem. It is one that impacts the total region. And the region agreed to do everything that they can to unshackle and do away with this agreement. I think it's really interesting that the voices, Shep Miller pointed out, he actually said we need to do away with the contract, and it was not approved by the Commonwealth Transportation Board. It did not go to them. Kenny Alexander pointed out that he was in the General Assembly when this contract was signed, and neither did the General Assembly approve this. So it's an orphan, and it's time to take care of this orphan. Did I answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, you're right.
Any other
Mayor,
questions of?
No.
No, good. Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council, this time with your concurrence, we'll invite Chef Michael Moore, as you requested him to come and speak with you as regards to Hampton Roads Regional Jail, City of Portsmouth bed vacancies. Would you like to have a chair at the table? Or, he doesn't have a presentation.
Yes, he does.
Oh, yes, okay.
First, Sheriff Moore, thank you for coming tonight. And thank you.
And good evening to you all, and thank you for this opportunity. I really appreciate this moment. I'm feeling a little bit under the weather. I'm having issues with my throat. So to assist me this evening will be Under Sheriff Marvin Waters, and also attending with me also is Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Edwards. But thank you. And okay. Thanks. Excuse me.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Oh, sorry. Might want to cut it off.
And this is a pretty brief. Okay.
I I want to give a quick synopsis of the Portsmouth City Jail. The structure was built in 1970 with a capacity of 288 inmates. It's an 8-floor structure. It houses an inmate receiving unit, medical, with a mental health wing, kitchen services, commissary services, visitation area, general population, segregated area, and observation units. The Portsmouth City Jail currently houses male and female inmates and is currently approved to house federal inmates that we were not allowed to house prior to 2018. We're currently pending an MOU with the Virginia Department of Corrections to allow inmates with 24 months or less time to serve their convictions at their home jail. So these are inmates who don't have any issues, who haven't had any problems, escapes, who have been in the state system, and the last 24 months they will be able to come here and finish out their sentences. And that agreement should be done within the next 60 days.
Those prisoners, will the state provide more funding for those?
Absolutely.
And one of the key elements with that is a lot of the outlying DOC facilities have been inquiring about our reentry program. So that has to do with a lot of those inmates being willing to come back to their home area and participate in that reentry program, and also the work release program.
Under the sheriff's advisement, we sent a team of 2 deputies to different facilities in the state to outline the pros and cons of sending the inmates to this area. And the goal of it was just to get the Portsmouth inmates back to this area. And with this MOU, it would actually be inmates from Virginia Beach going all the way up to Suffolk. So they opened the program up to more inmates than we actually expected. We're going to go on to the next thing. Of the Portsmouth City Jail. One of our goals is to provide a constitutionally sound incarceration that complies with the Department of Criminal Justice, the U.S. Department of Justice, which was the U.S. Marshals that came in and they did a study of the jail and they did a code inspection of the jail, which opened us back up to accept U.S. Marshal inmates. And we also got approved with 100% Department of Corrections inspection over the summer. The reentry program is a program that we're using to bring down recidivism within the community. We have community programs such as our Senior Watch program, our DARE program, our Kids Sprint program, our work release program, youth services, substance abuse counseling for inmate, and programs that directly impact the recidivism of the city of Portsmouth. One thing that we're proud to start offering is the parenting and fatherhood classes along with the Urban League. The Urban League has stepped up and said that they will come in and help with these along with our current reentry program. So this is in addition to what we're currently offering. And our inmate labor work crews that provide assistance to our senior community and our neighborhoods as far as cleaning up issues. And we even went as far as yesterday there was an issue in Cavalier Manor with 100 tires being out. And that crew was ready to go out and pick those items up. But the one thing was we didn't want to do it at night.
They didn't do it.
So when we went back this morning, the tires were gone.
Yeah, we had moved them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hampton Roads Regional Jail. The Hampton Roads Regional Jail was built in 1998. The purpose of the jail was to ease overcrowding in the Portsmouth City Jail, which had an average population of upwards of 700 inmates. This included a federal population, which was our ICE inmates, and also our local inmate population. The primary function of the Hampton Roads Regional Jail was to house inmates, female inmates, male inmates, and inmates requiring special management. The City of Portsmouth is currently obligated to 250 beds at $60.45 per diem. Ten years ago, this per diem was $30.85. The current rate is $60.45. If the per diem rate grows at the same rate that it did from 2009 to 2019, the per diem rate would be $120.20 per inmate. As of late, the regional jail has had some issues, and I would say as of late very loosely. The one thing I want to do is just capture a snapshot from 2016 to today. In December, the U.S. Department of Justice deemed the Hampton Roads Regional Jail treatment of inmates as unconstitutional and cruel and unusual.
What year was that? It says 2019?
Yeah, this was actually in December of 2018 that this report came out. The Richmond Times-Dispatch declared Hampton Roads Regional Jail Virginia's deadliest jail for inmates. That was dated 9/3/2016. Inmates died nearly 9 times more often in custody than any other jail or regional jail in our Commonwealth. In the most recent 3 years, Hampton Roads Regional Jail has had 17 in-custody deaths. The U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement withdrew their detainees, citing Hampton Roads Regional Jail did not meet standards and a federal inmate had died. Now, with that, anytime that there's an issue with the federal inmate, it launches a federal investigation, similar to the one that happened with our jail. When ICE immigration guys came in and they did their study and they did their walkthroughs and they did their policy and procedures checks, they pulled every federal inmate from that facility and have not entered that facility since and will not go in for an inspection. It was deemed unsafe before this DOJ report. Within that time, Hampton Roads Regional Jail has had 5 superintendents in the last 18 months. The jail is currently at 33% over capacity. The 33% over capacity is key due to the fact of the DOJ report. The DOJ report highlights that inmates that went into the jail and needed medical attention, that jail's policy is 14 days for a person to be seen by medical. 14 days for someone to see medical on a sick call is not good. This had been overlooked and many inmates were not seen within the 14-day window, some going without medical treatment and some going as far as 20 to 27 days. The DOJ report also talks about inmates with mental health issues being housed alongside of inmates in general population. In corrections, this cannot happen. And when these inmates complained about it, their issues were put under the rug and not addressed. Some of this resulted in some form of death also. These are the recorded deaths at Hampton Roads Regional Jail. The one thing that the sheriff has the capacity to do is to maintain the safety and security of the jail itself. But the one thing that's constantly overlooked is these citizens who happen to be incarcerated have a legal obligation to serve their time without dying, basically. A lot of these people went into this jail with misdemeanor charges, light charges. Jail is only supposed to be for 12 months. And these people did not come out of this jail. A lot of these cases have resulted in settlements. A lot of these cases have resulted in this DOJ report. These are just not people that went to jail and were sentenced to death. These are Portsmouth residents. These are people who could have been in our jail and had an opportunity. A 14-day window to see medical treatment is totally unacceptable. Inmates that come into Portsmouth City Jail are seen by medical from the time they come in almost 2 to 3 times a day. A sick call passed in the Portsmouth City Jail gets you seen by medical within hours. The one thing that we tasked ourselves on doing is not just coming to this board to come at you guys with a whole bunch of issues of the regional jail, but to offer some form of solution. And I want to start with the one thing that we all agree on. Removing an existing 50-year-old structure from the waterfront is key. That is something that we all agree on. The one thing that we totally need to do is to look at the number of beds that we have at Hampton Roads Regional Jail. From 2011, our numbers have been going consistently down. The range of 250 beds is the size of Norfolk. That's the size that Norfolk has. Norfolk has 250,000 residents, and they have 250 beds. The city of Hampton has 130 residents, and they have 175 beds. So the range that we're looking at is 125 for our current need, possibly 125 to 150. But we're way out of range as far as population, and it's something that we need to actually review and task ourselves in looking at, along with this DOJ report. The one thing that we're looking at is a new Portsmouth City Jail with an inmate capacity of 250 inmates, and this could be placed in existing city property, which is adjacent to the courthouse. This will reduce some of the cost of the new jail, but I think it's something that we actually need to look at with the pending DOJ report. With these DOJ reports, the next step is a consent decree and a federal takeover of those jails, as is happening in New Orleans. In New Orleans, that's happening, and the per diem rate, they wish they could have a 120 per diem rate at this point, because there's so much oversight, somebody has to pay for it, and it falls back on the localities. So for us to look at the Department of Justice report, the current conditions of the jail that we know of, and send inmates to that jail is almost beyond negligent. We have inmates, family members who call, send letters. I've had a lady who said that she would do an injunction to get her son removed out of that jail. And this isn't just us saying, hey, we need a new jail because of this. We need to look at what we have and where we're sending these people to, because the jail that we're sending these people to is not the jail that we're putting all of this great information into. It is actually something that we need to look into, just like the Department of Justice did, and they deemed it cruel and unusual.
And we know this is a lot to take in, because we're not even sure if everyone has had an opportunity to actually review this DOJ report. And with us is the key to the regional jail existence from the very, very beginning was to address overcrowdedness, and at that time 4 big cities. Chesapeake came on a little bit later. So that was the function of that when that construction was open. Then it shifted drastically to becoming an infirmary for the inmates who were ill. They were never able to make that transition from addressing overcrowdedness to taking care of the physical and the mental illnesses of the inmates. I have no question about the superintendent, the current superintendent. I'm sure he can do his job. I have all the confidence in the world in him. But the issue has been over those 5 different superintendents that they have had, it has been looking at the problem from the top instead of looking at the problem from the bottom and back towards the top. And the problem is that they've been understaffed, and the 33% is key as far as being overpopulated in that regional jail. And even if you are at full staff, we know in this profession, oftentimes it's a revolving door. So by the time you get a deputy or correctional officer trained for that position, they move on to a different location, a higher paying position at another facility. So you start all over again. So even when they get at full staff, it's going to still be those challenges. So the purpose, again, of that jail was to address overcrowdedness. So now we need to do the same thing with the regional jail, because they're going to have this problem day in and day out because of the overcrowded situation. And when I ran for this office, one of the key things I ran on was a constitutional rehabilitative approach to incarceration. I can't, in good conscience, put a dollar value on the life of an individual. That's what I have to deal with. That's what I grapple with day in and day out, to making sure, because even in our jail, we average around 200 inmates. And it's a challenge, but it's a challenge worth meeting to make sure that our inmates get the treatment that they deserve. And just to give you an example, the colonel mentioned the intake process at the regional jail. It might be 14 plus days before they get to see medical. Our jail is 4 days. And actually that has changed. I don't even allow them to go 4 days without medical having intervention into that inmate's health. And one of the things that we changed when we came into office back in January of last year is that any inmate that comes in through intake, not only would the deputy participate in that intake process, but someone from the medical staff will also be participating in that intake. Now, there's a series of like 4 to 6 questions that medical or the deputies ask the inmate when they come in. If they refuse, they have the right to refuse to answer those questions. But if medical participates in that question session, at the very least, they can get eyes on that individual. You can tell a lot about an individual oftentimes just by looking at them. If the temporal area is sunken, the cheek area is sunken, you know that that person may be in crisis. So to have that eyes on with the medical working along with the deputies during that intake process, just in the last, month and a half, I will go as far as to say we have saved the lives of 4 people because we actively participated in that intake process. One, and this is not a swipe at the police department, but we've had a number of people to come into our facility to be dropped off, and those people have just ingested a large amount of drugs, whether it's heroin, prescription medications, and with the medical being involved now, those questions are asked before the police department even leaves. It's been a tussle with them to get them to understand that if they have made those omissions, meaning the person that they have arrested, if they've made those omissions to those police officers, that person has to go directly to a medical facility for treatment. So just in the last month and a half, we've had 4 incidents of that where we have actually, like I said, feel like we have actually saved 4 lives of a problem that could have been a lot deeper than what it was, where people had ingested large amounts of narcotics. One gentleman had been in a car accident. He was brought to this facility. And the reason I bring this up is because the intake process at the regional jail is a little bit different. Intake process here is pretty swift. This particular gentleman who had gotten into this car accident was brought here. We refused to take him. We said that he needed to go directly to the hospital, so we got medical treatment for him to go to the hospital. The doctor said we saved either his life and or we saved permanent paralysis. So that's another incident where we're heavily involved day in and day out with the intake of these people who come to us for their care. We don't get into what crimes they've committed. We get into our responsibilities of making sure when they come in, they go out on their own. And that's all we try to do. So this is not a knock at the regional jail. I'm new to that board. I'm on that board. This report came out after the last board meeting, so I haven't had a chance to address it with anyone in there. And being I'm the new sheriff on the board, I'm a little perplexed because this has been going on for a number of years. And why it hasn't been addressed from top to bottom or bottom to top, I do not know. But it troubles me. It bothers me because to me, to be in charge of taking people in, everyone belongs to someone. And that's just the way I feel. So my responsibilities go deep into the community. It goes deep into security at the courthouse. It goes deep into our work release. It goes deep into this inmate protection. Because we can do, and I can safely say we can do a much better job. And that's a knock again on a larger facility. When you compare our jail to the regional jail, it's like private school and public school in the big city. We're going to give that attention to the people that really need that attention. And to constantly turn our back. And we're talking about 17 deaths, and that's not even counting the deaths that have occurred after this report came out. So, again, we thank you. I know it's a lot to take in, and hopefully everybody will have a chance to review the regional jail DOJ report. Any questions at all?
Questions? Yeah, I've got a few questions. How many inmates do you currently have in the Portsmouth City Jail as of today?
As of today, 186. And we range anywhere between 175 and 220.
Do you know how many empty beds you have at Hampton Roads Regional Jail as of today?
Last count I had, we had, of those 250 beds, I think 183 were filled.
Currently there's 93 empty beds, and as the per diem that the undersheriff gave us at $60.45 a day, that's costing the city $5,621 a day, which is over $2 million a year based on that number of beds since we had a contract. So, you know, we've had conversations here based on that contract, we have to pay for those beds. Those beds should be filled, and that's why we're having this conversation.
Yeah. And this is the prime time, because when you look at this contract, the contract does not have an ending date. It does not have forecasting in it. At the very least, that contract should have had in it a review or renewal point. Because to not have forecasting, and our business is based on what the police department does and what the Commonwealth Attorney's Office does and even the U.S. Attorney's Office. To have open run contract. So this is the prime time that the city, because this was entered into by politicians. It's going to take politicians to revamp this contract. It's much like that tolls that we pay with these tunnels. I can't put a dollar amount on saving someone's life. I look beyond that. So we're going to have to get to a point where we can come together and renegotiate. I'm not saying, because really, with this DOJ report, that contract becomes void because they are not supplying the standard of care that's required by Department of Corrections and the United States Constitution.
First of all, I want to commend you, Sheriff, and Colonel Waters, and your department and your staff for elevating the level of safety and excellence in the jail. What you have demonstrated in terms of what you have just communicated, some of the things that were lost as a result of whatever it was, has been regained. And I think our credibility has been upgraded as it relates to our local jail. Couple of things as it relates to the Department of Justice report. I want to read something real quick to my council members. This is Department of Justice report, December 19, 2018. It reads, after careful reviewing the evidence, we conclude that there is reasonable cause to believe the conditions at the jail violate the 8th, 14th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution. Specifically, we have reasonable cause to believe that the jail fails to provide constitutionally adequate medical and mental care to prisoners, including by placing prisoners with serious mental illness in restrictive housing for prolonged periods of time under conditions that violate the Constitution. We also have reasonable cause to believe that the jail violates the ADA by denying prisoners with mental health disabilities access to services, programs, and activities because of their disabilities. Now, I read that to say that this is from the Department of Justice. My point being that if you, Sheriff, and your department do not feel comfortable sending our folks over there, our inmates, to the regional jail because of these safety concerns, I think that's a very valid reason. And I would go on to say, recently, you may have read that the state just recently settled a lawsuit with the regional jail, which potentially could have been $60 million, and we can't put a price on someone's life. I agree with you. The state settled for $3 million, but it's critically important that those individuals that come into our care, that we protect them and provide all the rights that are afforded them, and it is not just about a dollar. We are talking about people's lives. And by the way, the last point I want to make is, when we negotiated this contract in I believe it was 1995 or somewhere, that service agreement, when we negotiated that, our population was different. Norfolk, as you said, has 250 beds. Norfolk has about 250,000 people. Portsmouth has 95,000. We need to renegotiate that contract so that it fits our needs and our purposes today and going forward. And we need to ensure that we as members of this city council make sure that our citizens are safe in whatever capacity they're under. So yeah, I thank you.
I appreciate that, but I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea that we're trying to completely pull all the inmates out of the regional jail.
Sure.
It's just that they need some relief, and they need relief quick. There are 1,100 plus inmates in that facility, 33% over capacity, and that's at full staff, and they still are having a challenging time.
We're running short on time. Let me get all the questions in. Paul?
As a city, we're given the mantle of being able to detain our citizenry. And what I want to know is, at what point do we become liable as a city if we sit back and see these type of reports coming out? Is it possible, Mr. Attorney, that the Philadelphia and Mississippi lawyers have possible avenues to sue us for libel?
Well, that's a good question, Paul. Mr. City Attorney, have you seen the report?
Mayor, I have seen a synopsis with regard to the report. I've spoken to counsel for the Hampton Roads Regional Jail. The report does discuss remedial measures. Many of the events reported in the report, as Undersheriff and the Sheriff have said, have been in the early years before the new superintendent came on. Individuals who are in the custody of the regional jail are the responsibility of the regional jail. So that is not a city liability issue when they are in the custody of the regional jail. And I think that answers Mr. Ball's question. But let me just add, having spoken with counsel for the Hampton Roads Regional Jail, the expectation is that there will be a further discussion that has been hampered only by the shutdown with regard to what has occurred since the report was developed, and if there are any other measures that need to be taken.
Hold on. I'm going to get people who have not yet had the floor. Bill.
Well, you know, the overcrowding brings up an issue. I know there's a contract, and we're being charged for the 250 bids. But why should we be charged when they can't handle anymore?
We don't know.
Is there anything in that contract to preclude them charging us when they can't even handle any additional bids? And that may be a legal question. Mr. Attorney, has someone answered?
Mayor, I don't have that answer. That would probably be.
We have two members of the board here.
Correct.
One is Sheriff Moore, one's Nate.
And Dr. Patton as well.
Okay.
Well, and the only thing I'll say was that we have a board meeting in February. I will get the exact numbers of the beds in the total jail, the total population, and I will report that at my liaison report after the February meeting, because I don't think they're above that level, but I'll report back.
Can I do a follow-up? I would say if that overcrowding, if the numbers verify that the overcrowding is there, I would say that we get a letter to them and let them know that we're not going to pay any additional until their overcrowding can entertain additional prisoners.
And that's all we're kind of saying, that it probably needs to be revisited.
Mayor.
Dr. Patton, then you haven't had a chance.
I'll yield to the Vice Mayor.
Yes, okay. I guess I wanted to know what are our steps to renegotiate the contract, because if we're a population of 95,000, then we should have about 95 beds that, you know, if we go on along the lines of what everything else is. But also, you know, when we see it in the media and in the news, it's always like it's a Portsmouth problem. This is a Hampton Roads Regional Jail. What is the percentage of Portsmouth workers and other city localities that are manning, you know, the jail, you know, because everyone has a part in making sure that it's accounted for.
Right. You want to answer? I don't know.
Yeah, we don't know staffing.
You can get that
Sounds like a whole
information.
nother meeting to me.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say no, but I need to.
One last comment, and what we'll do, we'll schedule this for our first meeting in February.
A follow-up discussion.
Questions have been asked that need research, and
Would you like for Hackworth to come forward?
I'm sorry.
I said the February 11th. Would you like to invite Superintendent Hackworth to come forward?
I think that's a good idea.
I think so too. Would you?
Yes. Everybody in agreement?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, very good.
All right. Well,
We'll go on.
I think we have questions that need to be researched. We'll invite the
Sure.
regional jail superintendent to our, is that a Monday meeting?
That's a Monday meeting,
All right,
the 11th of
Monday
February, and then we'll keep you posted on it also.
We thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you.
Colonel Waters.
Thank
All
you.
right.
All right, let's go to the next item. Before
All
we
right.
go there, one thing we did not cover was the legislative day. Let's cover that. Everybody's got this. Who's going on that trip? Can you raise your hand if you're going? So, okay. Just 3 of us?
No, actually, it's supposed to be 5.
I was supposed to be going, but something came up at work.
Okay, we're down to 4.
Who's the 4th one?
I am.
Okay, are you going?
Councilman Battle.
Okay.
Each member of City Council received the most recent update as of this afternoon. Sherry Neal has taken the initiative to add on additional items to your agenda, to your schedule. And please note that it's starting around 7 a.m. and she has added a couple of committee meetings that she feels that you may be interested in that affect the city. Keeping in mind that the main part of the VML registration legislative day starts at 11.
Right.
Hopefully you're able to get there earlier. She has provided the different times for the various committee meetings if you're able to be there. But again, the main part of the day starts around 11 o'clock.
Thank you. Last year, we focused on getting there for the Virginia First Cities, and our whole delegation got there.
Yes.
It's problematic for the Hampton Roads Caucus because we're not going to have a speaking role at all at that meeting. And think about the numbers. If each city sends up 4 in the Hampton Roads, we'll have more members of council than we have members of the General Assembly. It's iffy whether or not Delegate James's bill is going to be heard on that date. So if you're adjusting your schedule, let's plan to get there at 10 o'clock at Virginia First Cities. That's where the real discussion is going to take place. That's where we will have a voice around the table. That building is down from the General Assembly building by a block and a half. Everybody in agreement on that?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Pat?
Yes, Mayor, we have 2 items.
Get the message back to Sherry?
Yes, I will speak to her tonight.
Go ahead.
Want to go with our items? Just to a reminder to City Council, your retreat is scheduled for February the 2nd, 2019 at Airfield Conference Center in Wakefield, Virginia. During the retreat, City Council, you will focus on your council's vision, engage in discussions on relative topics to include the 4 big things that you all will envision. You have met with the, or you have talked with the facilitators who are working in drafting the agenda, and I will yield to the mayor if you have any remarks. We will leave next Thursday. The retreat is next Friday, so it's moving fast. Okay, all right.
So it's upon us.
Okay.
Either be there or be square, right?
All right. We have 4 items for the City Council review tonight. The City Manager's report tonight. We have an adoption of an ordinance accepting the Emergency Food and Shelter National Board Program Grant in the amount of $5,891.50 from the Department of Homeland Security and appropriating said sum in the FY 2019 General Fund for the use of the Department of Social Services to assist Portsmouth citizens who have emergency shelter and utility needs. The second is a donation from Portsmouth to Portsmouth Department Association. It's an adoption of an ordinance accepting a donation of $100 from the Tidewater Baptist Women Missionary and Educational Convention and appropriating the said funds into the FY 29 Grants Fund for the Department of Social Services to use with intake funds. The third is an adoption of an ordinance accepting funds in the amount of $19,799 from the Virginia Department of Social Services and appropriating said sum in the FY 2019 Social Services Fund for use by Portsmouth Department of Social Services for staffing and operations. As you are aware, we put out publicly that there was a accelerated application process for SNAP funds going forward with the shutdown of the federal government. So everything has been done that, and the state has provided this additional money for over time.
Anybody got any questions about that? While we're on the agenda, we have under special presentations 3 families that we're recognizing foster care, and your Director of Behavioral Health Services will come to the lectern.
Yes.
Introduce the families.
Yes.
And this is part of the process of honoring all the families during the course of 1 year.
Yes.
Okay? And we have a public hearing. And after the public hearing, we will have the consideration, as you just said, of the item that we're in the public hearing. Anything else? Any
I have
questions?
one more item.
Okay, go ahead.
The fourth one is adoption of a resolution authorizing the City of Portsmouth to enter into a cooperation agreement to provide for the payment of notes issued by the Economic Development Authority and to pledge the city's full faith and credit in connection therein.
That's what the public hearing is about. Okay, let's quickly go to council liaison reports. Does anybody have a liaison report? I've given mine. Okay. We have a need to go into closed session.
I move to go into closed meeting pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A1 for the purpose of discussing and considering prospective candidates for appointees to boards and commissions.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion that's been duly made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Ready for the roll call vote. All in favor, vote aye. Opposed, nay.
Aye.
Okay, well,
we gotta
just telling you how that.
Mr. Battle?
Aye.
Mr. Clark?
Aye.
Mr. Glover?
Aye.
Mrs. Lucasberg?
Aye.
Mr. Moody?
Aye.
Ms. Simmons?
Aye.
Mayor Rowe?
Aye. We're in closed session. If you're not involved, please leave the room.